Through the overnight hours. Partly sunny, a thunderstorm tomorrow, the high 80. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
Currently 45 degrees at O'Hare. Your next news update, 7:30. And Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by IDT. Eliminate paper files with the IoT Smart Connected Scanning Device. Find them at ready4IDT.com.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So those construction workers that Trump met before he had to get into court yesterday and appear before Judge Juan Torquemada, they had something to say to those who queried them about their support for Trump. Like this gentleman. He's got a message for Biden.
What's it like seeing so many Republicans in Manhattan, so many Trump supporters in Manhattan? Does that surprise you?
No, not at all. It's turning now. Trump's turn again.
What's your message to Joe Biden?
F*** you.
I love that guguy. I must have listened to that 20 times yesterday. It was just so invigorating.
It's elegant in its simplicity. Bob Bartels is the business manager for the Steamfitters Local 638. He was on with Brian Kilmeade on Fox and Friends explaining, what you see with the position of the national building trades honchos and them hosting Joe Biden to chant 4 more years pause with is very different than what's happening at the local level with the rank and file, like his membership, in terms of where support is going. This isn't surprising, but it is indicative that there's, I think, more than a 50-50 chance that we're going to see a repeat of 2016 along the same fault lines.
Great to see the president coming and engaging with the blue-collar worker of New York City. We basically built New York. The union movement has made the middle class. And we are very patriotic union, and we are pro-America. So my members right now, I put out a poll in my union. President Trump is leading Joe Biden 3-1 on my presidential poll out of my 9,000 members right now. We are very tired of the situation with groceries, inflation, gas prices, illegal immigration, crime. We're living it every day in New York City.
So spot on. I keep thinking if Biden's elected, that the border's it's going to remain open. Taxes are going to go up. Women's sports are going to end. Mortgage rates will remain high, if not go up. Inflation's going to continue, and crime's going to continue.
Well, on the matter of the migrants, it's interesting what's happening. Some of our Western friends, similarly disposed to the left socialist fantasies here, like open borders. This is none other than the Amazon Post reporting, by the way. Amid a housing affordability crisis and a strain on social services, Justin Trudeau's government is rolling up the welcome mat for some immigrants to cap the number of permanent residents it will welcome, announced a temporary limit on international student visas, and pledged to shrink the population, or the proportion of the population made up of temporary immigrants, such as foreign workers.
Well, that's not very welcoming, Dan.
No, it isn't. That's not what I expect from a former grade school drama teacher. I expect more compassion. What is this business? It's almost like he's saying that some people can be illegal, and we know that no one can be illegal. Rishi Sunak, he would fit right in with some surrender Republicans in like the Senate Republican caucus. He and I think Mitt Romney would be fast friends. So this is not somebody who's particularly strident or philosophically consistent or conservative. And yet here was his big announcement this week. Deportation flights, they're going to happen.
No ifs, no buts. These flights are going to Rwanda. And most importantly, once the processing is complete, we will physically remove people. And to do that, I can confirm that we've put an airfield on standby, booked commercial charter planes for specific slots, and we have 500 highly trained individuals ready to escort illegal migrants all the way to Rwanda, with 300 more trained in the coming weeks. This is one of the most complex operational endeavours the Home Office has carried out. But we are ready. Plans are in place. And these flights will go come what may. No foreign court will stop us from getting flights off. Rwanda is ready too. And I'd like to thank the government of Rwanda for their work in strengthening their asylum system, passing legislation, and setting up a new appeals tribunal.
Now that's real leadership. And if we should do something here, then where would we send them? What country would we send them to?
What do you mean? You send them back to the countries from whence they came. I mean, pretty straightforward. And on the topic of what Trump has been talking about, which is a promise of mass deportations, it's interesting. That was the sort of rhetoric that would get people decrying him as a xenophobe and so on and so forth a few years ago. Now it's a position supported by 51% of the general public, according to an Axios Harris poll that's out. 30% of Democrats and 46% of Republicans now say they'd end birthright citizenship, which is constitutionally guaranteed at present. Remarkable turn of affairs. And it's so much so that a handful of Democrats are calling on Biden to reinstate Biden. Oh, so he can do something. Biden to reinstate Title 42 and remain in Mexico immigration policies. Democrats Marie Perez, Washington State, Jared Golden, Maine, Mary Peltola, Alaska, Vicente Gonzalez, Texas, Don Davis, North Carolina. Huh. So this is why I say there are some wild cards. There are some variables that are different than 2016, but it seems eerily reminiscent along many metrics. For more on the topic, and perhaps a couple of others, we're pleased to be joined by Noah Rothman. He's senior writer at National Review. He's also the author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I read the piece that you wrote about sort of the potential voter problems that both Biden and Trump have. You know, if Biden loses, it'll be this reason. If Trump loses, it'll be for that reason. So I'll let you distill that. But I mean the working class, the blue collar union types that maybe don't show up in midterm elections but do show up for Trump. It seems like that enthusiasm is still present, particularly since he's performing better in swing states now than almost he ever has. And this open borders issue is something that even some Democrats are recognizing as a millstone.
Yes, that clip that you played of the very stereotypical, blue-collar New Yorker who I grew up with, I know that guy, and that guy is a very familiar guy. He's a dying breed in New York City, but he's the kind of person I grew up with in the 80s, 90s. And his comments strike me as sort of the election, the theory of the election from both parties in microcosm. Just really zooming out over the last couple of decades. The coalitions have been changing. The last vestiges of the Democratic New Deal coalition are kind of falling away. And that was this really broad coalition of voters that in FDR's time included, African Americans in the South and actual racists in the South and workers in the North and professionals with degrees. It was a much broader coalition. But as the Democratic Party has begun to rely more and more on degree holders, it has gotten smaller. There's just not enough of them. And one of the things that I've written about is if Joe Biden loses, you can see why he loses now, because they've relied on this coalition of voters. That is just not a big coalition of voters. There aren't a lot of people in this country that have four-year degrees. Like 30% of the country, self-reported, which means it's probably less. And those people, they respond to different incentives than the vast majority of voters. All of the Democratic parties are problems are downstream from that. The issues that they focus on, which are so niche and boutique, like climate change and structural racism and what have you. But the thing about that coalition that's valuable is they turn out to vote in every election. Off years, specials, midterms, generals, they're there. Because they're hyper-educated, they're hyper-aware, and they're always informed on politics, and they like voting, something they do as a hobby. The Republican Party, by contrast, has begun to attract less educated voters, fewer people who have those 4-year degrees. Now, the thing about that's advantageous is there's a lot more of them. So in a high engagement election, like a presidential election, it's a real risk to have a coalition that's small because you expect a big turnout. The only problem with that coalition is it's not a reliable voting bloc. They don't always turn out at the polls. Maybe they'll turn out in a presidential year. In fact, that's the theory that Republicans are working on. But as we've learned over the last couple of cycles, midterms, specials, off years, that Democrats have been winning unexpectedly, they're not reliable voters in those elections, which is a bad trade-off. So now the theory gets tested here in 2024. Does this enthusiasm among this broad universe of low-propensity voters sweep out a very high-propensity but smaller coalition of voters that's loyal to the Democratic Party? Big question mark, and that's basically the whole theory of the race at this point.
Yeah, the other piece of this too. I mean, even going assuming that you get the turnout plus from that coalition that Trump got in. Really in 2016 and 2020, and seems poised to get again. But in terms of sustaining it, the just sort of antagonism. You talk about the degreed class that provides the base of the Democrat Party as in niche issues. So, but it's not just that they're niche issues, that they're sort of not front and center for more blue collar voters. It's also that they're openly hostile and antagonistic, and it's generating that FU response you heard from the construction workers. It's not just like you're not paying attention to me. It's also like, could you just stop with open borders and forcing my kid at this grade school to listen to a drag queen read him stories and all the other business and these animals I'm watching at Columbia University, and this is after Black Lives Matter destroyed the downtown of the city I live in or live around, and it's on and on and on, the open hostility.
That's exactly right. They don't share the same sensibilities as probably most of the country. So Rishi Sunak, that clip that you played of him announcing these deportation flights, would be a great thing for Joe Biden to have done when he restarted, inexplicably after having stopped it for literally no reason, deportation flights to Venezuela. Restarted that, I think, late last year. But Joe Biden can't give that speech. In fact, Joe Biden can't give a speech about the big legislative victory he just won. He just got the Congress to pass a big package of foreign aid for embattled allies abroad that he's been seeking forever. Have you heard him talk about it?
Right.
No. He can't celebrate it. Because he would have to say, well, we're supporting our ally Israel in its defensive war against Gaza. And he's afraid to say that, even though that's his policy. That's what he wants to do. It's what he's been advocating. And he can't go out and tout his own successes for fear of antagonizing this very small rump of extremely agitated, very loud, very telegenic in the worst possible sense, coalition of voters that is, one of the most front and center representatives of this highly educated, upwardly mobile, affluent, and utterly unrepresentative coalition that the Democratic Party has courted.
So Noah Rothman, President Trump is stuck in a courtroom, can't campaign 5 days out of the week. What do you make of President Biden out there on the campaign trail so far?
Well, I haven't seen much of him. In fact, that's one of the frustrations. I heard Andrea Mitchell complain about this, saying that the trials were actually giving Donald Trump too much airtime, which is kind of contrary to the theory that was retailed ahead of his trials, that the fact that he's getting too much airtime and Joe Biden's not getting enough was a source of concern for partisans in the press who are obviously Democratic-leaning. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I haven't been borne out in polling. We don't see any evidence that the trials are actually helping Donald Trump with a general electorate. They help him with Republicans, but you need more than a Republican. Nevertheless, the assumption here that Joe Biden needs more camera time and can somehow capture it, can somehow capture the nation's attention. I don't see any evidence of it. I don't know how he does it. What is he going to do to reshape the narrative if he can't even articulate, as we were just talking about, articulate the case for his own presidency, because he's afraid if he were to articulate the case for himself in a general election, it would alienate his core voters. He's in a bit of a pickle in that sense.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole he's getting too much airtime. Well, you may not want to try to former president of the United States in Manhattan. There's a lot of media there. I don't know if you know, not to mention just media that's attended to everything that Trump does and says for a variety of reasons. So the idea that he won't be able to campaign because you got him boxed in that courtroom. He goes out and stands with construction workers. He goes out to the bodegas and stands with Jose Alba and talks to them. He's bringing in a former PM of Japan and having a little tete-a-tete there before he has to go to court. I mean, that's plenty on a 24-hour basis for the news cycle.
So it's pretty clever because Donald Trump has to, by order of Judge Merchant, he has to be in the courtroom every day that there is a trial, and that's hindering his campaign appearances. So they've done something creative where they're like going to bodegas and having interactions with voters in the streets and trying to make events out of that. And it's an interesting small bore style that's also very humanizing in a way that is advantageous to Donald Trump. And it's reflective, and there's some people who are saying, well, that's not the people who are turning out, they're not representative of Harlem voters, really, right? I mean, Donald Trump is going to lose Harlem and New York City and Manhattan broadly by like 20 points in November, and that's true. But if the theory of the race is, as we've been talking about, more non-degree holding voters leaning Republican, you would expect to see that. You would expect to see the margins tighten significantly in dark blue areas. And the same could be said for the suburbs, for example, which were used to be a Republican bastion, stronghold, and now are in play or leaning Democratic because degree holders, affluent, upwardly mobile degree holders, are gravitating more towards the Democratic coalition. So you would expect to see those margins tighten across the country. The big question mark for everybody is how much will they tighten? Donald Trump's not going to win New York, so it doesn't really help him very much. But it certainly helps Republicans down ballot. It certainly helps Republicans on the margins in congressional seats and in local and municipal races.
Well, right, but they're also, but that interaction with those steam fitters and other construction workers that's a proxy. I mean, it's a microcosm, and so other similarly situated folks like those guys around the country see that too. Same thing with the small shop owners; they see that too, and so it's an appeal through them to others similarly situated.
But this is the Democratic Party's problem that the Republican Party has now inherited. The distribution, the geographic distribution of these voters is not advantageous. They're cultivated, they're amassed in small geographic areas that are prohibitively Democratic. You could win 20% more working class voters than you did last cycle in New York City, but it's not going to win you New York City. This is always the Democratic Party's problem, is they have more voters. That's why they always want the popular vote, but they were geographically distributed in ways that didn't advantage them in the Electoral College. And this is the problem that Republicans will now court if they want to assume the New Deal coalition, the remnants of it, from the Democratic Party. They need a broader base. You need a broad base geographically, not just demographically. And that's why the suburb should be the battleground that we're talking about here. Working class voters aren't, necessarily the lunch pail type. I'm in a working class neighborhood, but all of my neighbors make six figures. They work with their hands, but they make a ton of money doing these vocational activities. So we're not talking about, this stereotype that I think Democrats actually believe about what the working class person actually is. These are upwardly mobile people too.
Absolutely.
And, many of them have degrees under their belt too. But they have a different sensibility, and the cultural sensibility is what we're talking about here, more than demography, more than what you're making a year.
Noah Rothman, senior writer, National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.